Welcome back, guys, to Calling Them Out, where I call out lies in society and I correct them with biblical truth. I am your host, Nefreteri, and we have a bomb episode today, if I say so myself. So this season, I have decided to tackle a lot of topics that I don't hear pastors really preach on. And I've been going to church for like over 20 years, okay? So there are reasons why we don't really hear sermons on this stuff, because most preachers don't want to watch half their congregation just walk out the back, okay? So if you don't like what I'm saying, then you can obviously just click it off, which would be a shame, but nevertheless, you're entitled. So this is a two-part series that I'm calling For Beauty and for Glory. And yes, as the name implies, I am going to clear up external beauty in men, women, and just in general from God's eyes and biblical truth, not the world. I'm going to clear up what's going on in the world, and we're going to look at it from God's design, okay? Now, this is a massive topic, so I did have to break it up. And so today I'm going to focus strictly on beauty in all of its forms, and I'll explain that momentarily. And then next week I'm going to focus strictly on the human body, okay? Now, it's terrible. This is an absolute monster. Now, I am going to touch on internal beauty a little bit, but it's really external beauty that I want to hit, because that's what's not really being spoken about. And I have sifted through a lot of different blogs and books and stuff. I want to clear up what beauty means to God. And so, as the title, Beauty and Glory, suggests, we have a focus scripture. It is from Exodus. The first time beauty by itself, I don't mean beautiful, beauty is mentioned is in this verse. Exodus 28, it's when they are making the tabernacle for God, a home for God to live in here on the earth. Exodus 28:2, it says, "And you shall make holy garments for Aaron, your brother, for glory and for beauty." And then again in verse 40, it says, "For Aaron's sons, you shall make coats and sashes and caps. You shall make them for glory and for beauty." Many external things, they do have internal meanings. Glory and beauty are they're big topics in and of themselves, but we need to understand that God is not simplistic. So while there can be an internal meaning and an external meaning, today, just focusing on the external. And so for this episode and the next one, I want you to view God, our creator, as the ultimate artist. I do this all the time. I love viewing him as an artist. It really changes your mind as to why the world is the way that it is, okay? And so I'm going to give you an outline for what we're going to go through, because I know most of you probably are interested in external beauty, and I like human external beauty, and I get that. But I want to approach this a different type of way. I don't think that that's like the paramount of all things when it comes to beauty. Beauty, we see it everywhere. And so I'm going to try and lay the foundation for us, what beauty means to God as opposed to the culture, what they've been shoving in our face. That's where you probably get this idea that you want to focus on human beauty. That's not that important to God. So, but we'll get there. So by the time we do, maybe you'll be more receptive to what I have to say. Okay, so let's just step by step. Okay, so number one, I will give us the definitions for both beauty and glory from a godly perspective, not a human perspective. Next, I want to do a quick compare and contrast, because this is really going to set us up for what we do here. I'm going to expose things and bring them into the light. There is an attack on beauty in the culture. I will get there when we get there. Third, we're going to talk about God's design and his order, which will bring us right into taking pride in who we are and who, us as God's creation. And then last, and the bulk of this will be human beauty, and I will break that up into a variety of things. So let's just dive right in, okay? So beauty. I got this definition from my systematic theology book, okay? So we're going godly here. God's beauty is that attribute of God whereby he is the sum of all desirable qualities. Does that sound correct? All desirable qualities being beautiful? God is perfect, so he doesn't lack anything at all. And that's what we're going to call ultimate beauty, okay? David says in Psalms, in one of the Psalms, that he would like to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord. This is not just physical. This is like an all-encompassing kind of thing, which then brings us into glory, another all-encompassing word. And it encompasses like God's presence, his light, his magnificence. From my actual Bible dictionary, this is what it says. Weighty importance and shining majesty that accompany God's presence. Maybe you've heard of C.S. Lewis's book, The Weight of Glory. Glory has a kind of heaviness to it. It's exalted, it's high, but also heavy at the same time. The Roman Empire, the Romans, they understood this. And so they were very much looking to rise to the pinnacle of human glory because they didn't believe in the God that we believe in. But they're not completely off track. Why are they not off track? Because humans are image bearers of God. It says in Genesis 1:27 that we are made in the image of God, created in his image. And so it also says in Isaiah 43:7, God calls us sons and daughters. And then he says, everyone who is called by my name, whom I created for my glory, whom I formed and made. So humans, we have been given a huge amount of dignity just by being created humans. And then we have Jesus. Jesus comes down as a human being. He didn't come down as an elephant. He didn't come down in like a supernatural form. He lived in actual human flesh. He was fully God and fully man. He had a full human experience. That also elevates us. Then, as New Testament believers, we've got more glory coming. In 2 Corinthians 3:18, it says, and we all with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. This is us becoming like Christ. More glory, as I said, getting closer and closer to God. So starting off this episode, everybody should feel really great about themselves. If you're a believer, even more, okay? But next, we are now living in a fallen world because of Adam and Eve's sin, right? So though God had this fantastic design and that we have, God's beauty and his glory and us made in his image, we're living in this fallen world with a fallen nature and an enemy of God, Satan himself. And I bring him up because I want to do a compare and contrast of some very fascinating things that are going on in America. So simultaneously, America is pushing both superficiality in media and social media, and then there's like this ugliness rising at the same time in the culture. And so I'm going to compare them to you, for you, and in 4 different categories. So first, architecture. If you've seen old buildings, they're beautiful, like stained glass windows, arches, columns. There's like soul in it, if you wish. And then you look at our new buildings, and I'm not going to lie, some of them are really sweet looking. That's usually what they are. They're like sleek, cool, but they're very like geometric. And I don't know, you can take your pick. I think some of them, they lack the word that I used before, soul. They just don't have the kind of like majesty of the buildings of old. But it's up in the air. It's opinion based partially. Next, I want to talk about art. So also back in the day, we would have oil paintings. We would have these really detailed kind of, not just paintings, but also sculptures and marble. And nowadays, you could go to a MoMA, a Museum of Modern Art, and you'd see a banana with some scotch tape on the wall. And people call it art. Buy it. Pay millions of dollars for it. It's wild stuff. How about music? Before we had classical, orchestras, symphonies with lots of harmonies, really complex sounds, but they still all work together. Even the music of like the 90s and stuff were great. Today, you hear a lot of music, too much music if you ask me, that is a cacophony. It is a lot of noise. Some of it I would say it's straight up garbage. And actually we get a lot of people from the younger generations that are turning to older music because it's more musical. What do you know? And then how about just physical beauty? Right now, there's an attack on physical beauty, like actual human beauty. So God has designed us, and you can look at a person and be like, oh, that's, human beauty. But on the other side, we're getting this weird disfiguration. And you see it with, like, I don't know, people are having, face tattoos. There's corpse makeup, I think it's called. It looks demonic or satanic. So all of this ugliness is actually coming from Satan. Satan attacks God's designs all the time. God loves beauty, and though Satan, as Lucifer, was beautiful, he does not like what God has made. And so he's like ruining everything. So that's why we're seeing superficiality. I said, I didn't say beauty. Superficiality is being pushed into our faces in the media, but then also ugliness is rising in society as well. So keep a lookout for it. So let's go on to the design that Satan is attacking, God's design and his order. So if you want to know about God's design, you just go right there to Genesis 1, right there in the beginning. And it's beautiful. God is creating this world, and all you have to do is go outside in nature that has not been polluted by mankind. And look up into the sky, the mountains, the birds, the animals, and you see design. Everything, everywhere. And every single day, God creates something and he calls it good. And then, he approaches the next day and he just comes back and it's like, hey, and then he makes his work and then it's good. And then the last day in Genesis 1:31, it's all over and he looks back and he says, everything is very good. Isn't that like an artist's dream? To sit there and admire your work and be like, yeah, that's great right there. That's what God did. God is also a God of order. So he likes harmony in everything. And in Genesis 1, as you look at what he's doing, everything is sequential. So every day he builds upon the next. So he's not just, one day making the stars and then the next day he's making animals. He did everything in a brilliant order. And so that's something that humans need to look at. We are trying to live by Jesus Christ's example. Jesus is God. So that's where we take our structure from in life. And so we need to take pride in ourselves as God's creation, but also look at the way that God worked in Genesis 1. When we work is a gift, by the way. A lot of people don't seem to know that. They think that it's some sort of cruel activity, but we spend a third of our day, if not more, at our jobs. And so if you make it or create it, it's got to be good. Now, God wants you to do your best, not the best. Our personal best is what God wants. It says in 1 Corinthians 10:31, therefore, whatever you eat or drink or whatever you do it all to the glory of God. When you are working somewhere, it doesn't matter if you like your boss or not. It really doesn't. Anything that comes out of your hands should be a reflection of not only yourself, but if you are a believer in Jesus Christ, then we are also ambassadors of Jesus. And so it is a reflection. Our work then becomes a reflection of Jesus. And Colossians 3:23 says, and whatever you do it heartily as unto the Lord and not to man. So you may not like your boss, but you're not working for your boss. You are working for God. So we should be exemplary employees. It doesn't matter if you own your own business or you are literally just an employee. People should look at you and be like, man, I just love having this person work here. I don't even know why they're such a great worker. You can tell them you're a Christian or not, but that is why you are a great worker. And so if you make it good, okay? On that note, art, one of my favorites. I said we're supposed to be looking at God as an artist. Art, you could be an artist. Some people feel like everything they have to do, they're like, oh, I want to give my life to the Lord. Do I have to go into ministry? No, God wants you to stay exactly where you are and be a light for him there. And he gives everybody different talents for a reason. And so this is one of my favorite passages in the Bible, because for people who think that God doesn't care about beauty or design or interior design and all this kind of stuff, like it's superficial, you're wrong. I'm sorry, but you are. And so I'm going to read for you from Exodus, still with the tabernacle. God gives a man named Bezalel a lot of gifts. And so I'm going to read it for you. It's Exodus 35, starting in verse 31. So Bezalel, and he has filled him with the Spirit of God, in wisdom and understanding, in knowledge and all manner of workmanship, to design artistic works, to work in gold and silver and bronze, in cutting jewels for setting, in carving wood, and to work in all manner of artistic workmanship. God, gives this guy so many gifts just to build his tabernacle because he wanted a beautiful tabernacle. And so art is from God. Beautiful art is from God. It's expressive creation. And so he makes the tabernacle, but then also the temple, if you see it later with David and Solomon, beautiful temple. God cares. And speaking of the temple, let's talk about cleanliness. The Bible is filled with the word cleansing from the Old Testament all the way to the New Testament. It talks about it all the time. God was so strict with cleanliness and purification. So it's not that we need to do the rituals that we see in the Bible, no. But in Romans 12:1, it says that we're supposed to present our bodies a living sacrifice. And we don't really think about the word sacrifice like giving a sacrifice to God the way they were actually sacrificing animals. That's what we're talking about here. So sacrifices, they were unblemished. They were like the best in the flock. Now, that doesn't mean that we need to be perfect, like you can't have, acne or things like that. That's not what it means. We need to be taking care of ourselves, okay? So your home, your car, the way we carry ourselves. As I said before, God is not a God of disorder. It says that in 1 Corinthians 14:33. So when you think of disorder, think of like a hot mess. So you don't have to be perfect. I'm laughing because I suffered from this. So I'm not a dirty person. I'm a messy person, if you wish, but messy in just one way, specific way. So I got the book, Marie Kondo's like tidying book, and it completely transformed my life. I mean, I changed my closets. I threw out all kinds of stuff, my dresser drawers, everything was great until I reached until I got to the books and paper section. And she was like, just throw them all out. And then the books, just give them away. And I was like, oh my word, I can't do that. First of all, my books, I don't give any books away. All of my books are my own. And I barely even lend them. They're for my library. But papers, man, I'm like Einstein. Like there are papers everywhere. I mean, I will literally vacuum my floor, pick papers up, and then put them right back, because I don't know, I need like a filing system. I mean, I'm just not very good at organizing. So there's no judgment here. It's just, we need to be conscious of this, because this has nothing at all to do with how much money we own. This is not about you having a maid. You could have a total jalopy of a car, okay? But the inside of it should be clean. Right? You don't need to have fast food and papers and dirty sneakers everywhere. It should be clean. If you live in a shack, okay, you should have the cleanest looking shack in the area, outside and inside. And then the person who walks out of the shack, you should be like, wow, look at that upstanding Christian, right? So we should be clean. We should be bathing. We should actually take the time to pick out our clothing, washing our clothing, getting haircuts, shaving. I mean, this sounds like, who are you talking to? Unbelievable. Unbelievable how some people put absolutely no time into grooming because they think that it's superficial. It is absolutely not. In America, it's weird. Because of social media, you have some people who are always dressed up because they're always taking content. Then you have like another group of people who they're just walking around in like pajamas to the store. Like, we need to have a certain level of a certain standard. Our standard should come from God. We just need to present ourselves well to the world because of who we are reflecting, Jesus. And so this brings me to the virtue of humility. Humility is simply knowing that we are valued. So we just need to do the best with what we have, with what God gave us. And so he gives us more than we think. Most of the time we're like, oh, I don't have this, I don't have that. Count your blessings. If you need to get a gratitude journal, then start checking off the things that you have, and then just take care of what you have. And to round this out, I wanted to say, in Ephesians 2:10, it says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." Everybody's been given gifts. Everybody has talents. We need to always be looking at the bigger picture, not just ourselves, not just our little circle, us in relation to other people, working with one another, and all the works of our hands should be working in the direction of eternity. So this also includes soul winning. People should look at us and be like, oh, that's a Christian, not because we look like, American conformed Christians. No. They look at us and they just see something about us. I don't know. Right now there's the Jesus glow trend. Maybe that's something like that. Okay? We should be exuding a light that to the world that shows that God is living inside of us. We have arrived at the bulk of this episode, which will be about human beauty. But I hope, from what you saw from the things that I presented already, that God does have a design for beauty. He does actually care. And it's not just what we view as, I guess, physically attractive. This is God's standards for beauty, not ours. And I want us to come at this with level-headedness, okay? Try and put out of your mind the things that are from the culture and the way the culture pushes very superficial things and tries to pit us against one another, and like, this person is more attractive than this, and like, the sexiest man alive or woman alive. We don't need any of that, okay? That's all of the world. We gotta scratch all of that. But we need to understand something. I do know that some people are very upset. They're like, why are there so-called better looking people than other people? It's not fair. If I was better looking, life would have been different for me. Why couldn't God have given me some of those attributes? I can't fully give you an answer to that, but what we're going to do is go back to the Bible. And so beautiful people are only mentioned in the Old Testament from what I am aware of. Appearances in general are just mentioned in the Old Testament. We need to realize that God is not simple. So God has a reason for everything that he does. And so I went through the Old Testament and I pulled out all the names of people who God talked about their appearance as beautiful people. And I'm going to do it for a reason. I'm going to rattle through this list because we need to ask, why is it in the Bible? Because the things that are in the Bible are there for a reason. So let's just start. Some of them you probably know. The first person who's ever mentioned in the Old Testament as beautiful is Sarah. It said Sarah was a woman of beautiful countenance. Next, Rebecca. This is Isaac's wife. A young woman, she was very beautiful to behold. Then we have Rachel. This is Jacob's wife. Beautiful of form and appearance. Joseph, Rachel and Jacob's son. He's handsome in form and appearance. Moses was called a beautiful child. Saul, the first king, he was choice and handsome. There was not a more handsome person in Israel. And then he's like taller than everybody else from the shoulder upwards. It actually tells you this. David, he's called ruddy, bright-eyed, good-looking. He's mentioned later as a handsome person. David gets himself a wife. Her name is Abigail. She has good understanding and a beautiful appearance. Then he gets Bathsheba, as we know. She was a very beautiful woman to behold. David has a daughter. Her name is Tamar. She's called a lovely sister of Absalom, who has good looks, no blemishes, and I think there's an entire verse dedicated to just his hair. He has a daughter, Tamar, who he named after his sister, and it says that she has a beautiful appearance. There's a woman named Abishag. She's like, it's weird culture. She was like a body warmer for David when he's older. She's called a very lovely young woman. Adonijah is another son of David's. He's very good looking. Then we skip over to Queen Vashti in the book of Esther. It says that she is beautiful to behold. Then there's Esther herself. She's lovely and beautiful. Job's daughters, no women so beautiful in the land. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They're looking for no physical defects, handsome, showing aptitude in learning. Why? Why are these descriptions in the Bible? As I said, God has a reason for everything. And so I would like to present to you something that I'm calling purposeful beauty. We need to recognize that God does everything for a reason. He doesn't just give people gifts for themselves. He does it for other people for a bigger purpose. So let's look at it. This verse, we all know it, but I want to read the whole thing to us. 1 Samuel 16:7 says, "But the Lord said to Samuel, 'Do not consider his appearance or height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not see as man does, for man sees the outward appearance, but the Lord sees the heart.'" If you listen to that whole verse, we are absolutely obsessed with physical beauty. Obsessed. Now, we get the appreciation for beauty from God. God appreciates beauty. But we distort our priorities with our fallen nature. And then beauty becomes more important. The physical appearance becomes more important than what's inside. And so the best example of this in the Bible is right around the time of that verse, and it's Saul, the first king of Israel. And so I want to explain Saul to you. In 1 Samuel 10, I want to read it to you. This is kind of how we vote for our politicians. It's really quite despicable, but here we go. 1 Samuel 10, 23 through 24. "So they ran and brought him from there, and when he stood among the people, he was taller than any of the people from his shoulders upward. And Samuel said to all the people, 'Do you see him whom the Lord has chosen, that there is no one like him among all the people?' So all the people shouted and said, 'Long live the king.'" So they didn't vote for him, but this guy, Saul, is totally not qualified. He's not. If you actually go through the story and you read about him, he's not. And so you would be like, but how could he not be qualified? God chose him for him. Yes. If you know the story, they ask Samuel for a king, and he's the prophet at the time. So Samuel goes to God, and he's like, "They've rejected me." And then God says to Samuel, No. They have not rejected you. They've rejected me. And so what does God do? He gives the Israelites the king that they deserve, an unqualified, good-looking man. That's who Saul is. So we sit there and we're like, oh, maybe we should vote for this person because, oh, I could look at this person for the next 4 years. Oh yeah, they're hot. Ridiculous. That's what humans do. That's how cuckoo people get for good looks. The jury wants to let somebody off because somebody's good looking. It's ridiculous. That's a flip-flop priority. That's not from God. We are to appreciate beauty, but not to sit there and glorify it like that. So now, I'm going to do like a full sprint here. I am going to fly through 4 different people in the Old Testament and why they were good looking. You know all of these, but I feel like people just miss it. They are not just attractive for nothing. And I'm doing this because I want you to understand that these people are beautiful for a specific reason. It's not for themselves. It's not so they can walk by and be like, oh, I wanted to get a hot boyfriend or girlfriend. That's what we're seeing today. And it's simply because we don't have a Bible. So you're not seeing people's lives unfold, but it's for a reason. And so let's just start. Let's just dig right in from the beginning. Joseph. Joseph, it says, he is handsome in form and appearance. Why? Just because? Absolutely not. What would this be from God's perspective? Well, Joseph gets sold into slavery, right? And so then he goes from a prison, and then what does he become? He becomes the prime minister, the royal vizier, the second in command of Egypt. But he's not Egyptian. He's like Hebrew, if you wish. It's not really, intact at that point in time. Now, as I said, he's a good-looking dude. The Bible doesn't fill in the blanks. It just says that he becomes second in command. But fill this in. Do you think that people were like, oh yeah, the dude who's not Egyptian, who was just in prison for, who knows, the past 10 years, and now he's going to be running our shows? How do people respond to that? Think about it from a human perspective. So Potiphar's wife, she tried to sleep with Joseph before. The guy was a slave. She was willing to risk that for a slave. That means Joseph's a good-looking boy. And then when Joseph, his father, Jacob, comes, he tells his father that the Egyptians look down on shepherds, so don't tell them that they're shepherds. So I don't think that Joseph was just readily accepted by everybody, but I think that he was probably more so because he was attractive. You see it, as I said, Potiphar's wife didn't care. I'm sure there were plenty of people who were like, we'll just let it slide. He's a good-looking dude. We're going to see this trend. We're going to see this trend later, so hold on to it. David, next up. As I said, he's ruddy and a good-looking boy. How does he get into Saul's court? We know that he's anointed, but how does he move up? So in 1 Samuel 16, Saul, he's being distressed and he's looking for somebody to maybe play music for him. And so somebody talks David up and says, he gives this whole list of things, and then he plays the harp, and then he throws in, and he's a good-looking boy. Now, remember, Saul is the best-looking man in the land. And now you have David. Kings like to have attractive people in their courts. He's like, sure, bring David in. And so let's keep going with David. So he's a good-looking guy. This guy gets all pretty much good-looking wives. Abigail, it says that she was beautiful. If you know the story of Abigail, she stops David in his tracks from doing something very, very stupid. I heard a pastor give a sermon on her, not her, but the situation, and he said it. He said, this woman was beautiful and smart. He goes, if she was not attractive, I don't believe that she would have been able to stop David. But she stopped him in his tracks. He was like, oh, man. And then he ends up marrying her later. So she was beautiful for a reason. God's a master weaver, a master artist making a plan. We have his other wife, Bathsheba. Now, why she's beautiful, who knows? But her behavior is completely unacceptable on the roof, taking a bath on the roof. Lust and passions, lurk up, and being on the roof didn't help. David not being where he was supposed to didn't help, and sin ensues. And so, yes, beauty can definitely instill lust and passions in people, but that is not an excuse. That is not an excuse that you can use with God. Let's always default to the fact that God wants you to appreciate beauty. That does not mean that you should be lusting for another person and calling a human being a temptation. Appreciation for beauty. So David has hot wives, hot kids. I'm just going to assume that it's just a gift from God. David was a man after God's own heart. There's not an explanation for every single reason why there's a beautiful person, but just because somebody is attractive doesn't mean that there's no problems. So because of David's sin, it said that his household would always have the sword in it. And so if you've read your Bible and I think it's 2 Samuel or 1 Kings, 2 Samuel, there's Ammon and Tamar, the brother and sister, and that's uncontrolled lust, and a crime happens because of Tamar's beauty. And that's definitely fallen nature, no self-control over his lust, Ammon. So not all things with beauty are good. Okay, so don't always err to the side that, being beautiful is better. Let's go to Esther. I feel that if a lot of women knew Esther, they would not like her. I feel that Esther probably didn't have many friends to begin with. Probably just her servants were hanging out with her because they had to. So why is Esther beautiful? Well, God needed an attractive Jewish woman to marry a Persian king to save a nation. So we don't really think about that. She didn't ask to be attractive, and she also didn't ask to get married to a king. Now, we might be like, oh, that's amazing. We don't know what Ahasuerus looked like. We don't know we know a bit about what he was like. But think about what she was supposed to do when she was queen. Some people don't give her the credit that she really deserves. So if you know that story, to save her nation, Mordecai tells Esther that she needs to go in to the king and make a request of him. And she's like, he hasn't requested me in over 30 days. And he was like, well, you need to go and do that anyway. And so what she's supposed to do is barge in on a king unannounced. Now, if you know anything about this man, Ahasuerus, she had to have gotten so dolled up for this man because he's a total nutter. She was like, do you know what he just did to his last wife, Queen Vashti, who was also beautiful? He just kicked her out of the kingdom because she didn't come when she was called. That's Esther's life. And nowhere in Esther does it say that Esther loved her husband. It said that he loved her, but what kind of love do you think he really had for her? It was probably just physical. So does that mean that Esther had a great life just because she was attractive? No, but her beauty served a purpose. Last people, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You see these guys in Babylon. It says the king asked for young men, no physical defect, handsome, and showing aptitude for all learning. So these are some good looking dudes. And Daniel is a major prophet. He's got a whole book dedicated to him. Daniel, he's also an advisor to either like 3 or 4 kings in his book. So why is Daniel good looking? Are you catching the drift from all these people? God needed somebody of his own to be in the government. And in all of these kingdoms, they seem to like attractive people. Kings do in their courts. And so God makes them attractive so that they can be like in the public eye, be in the public court of the king. So there's purpose behind it. It wasn't just for them. It wasn't so that they could, become Hollywood famous. And so we have a totally misguided view on beauty, and it comes from the culture. But we have to understand that the culture does not believe in God, and the culture doesn't believe in everybody having a purpose for one another. We're just here all fending for ourselves. The culture and society is not about community, but God is. So when you have a biblical worldview, it's amazing, but it's in complete opposition to the world. I want to clear up some of the perceptions that we have around beauty. When we think about beauty and people get really worked up because they're like, either they're not attractive or they think that they're really attractive, and these perceptions come in, all we're really doing is we're looking at ourselves, and then we're looking at other people and into other people's gardens and saying what we have and what we don't have, haves and have-nots. And so we have this envy from our fallen nature. And I did just explain this in one of my Lost Virtues episodes. Envy is an epic destroyer of relationships. We don't love the way Jesus taught us to love. Instead of looking at another person and loving them, we're looking at them and we're saying they have something and I don't have something. We cease to get to know another person or even take the time. We will just look at them from a distance, and then a lot of times what we'll do is we'll project our own thoughts or our own feelings of what we think their world is like. And the projections are really not so good. And so I wanted to do something in this episode. I want to explain how life is really not that swell for an attractive person. There are pros and cons to absolutely everything in this world. And because we have a fallen nature, life is really not great. If you look at this world from the culture's point of view, yes, you are 100% correct that you can have a gift that is beneficial to this world This world, that's if you're trying to acquire money or fame or position or power. If that's what you're looking for, then yes, you are right. There are things that God can give a person that is more advantageous. But if you're just looking at the world to like go to eternity, then it doesn't matter what you have, because we're all on the same mission to win souls. And if you didn't know, that's what we're here for. That's why God leaves us here. Yes, he wants us to have a good life, but we're here to win souls for eternity. And when we get to heaven, and I said we'll talk about bodies in the next episode, but when we get to heaven, we'll have different bodies. I can't explain what those are, but it's going to be better than what we have now, okay? And we're not going to have the envy problems that we have here. So a lot of people will look at an attractive person and they will say, oh, well, you can get a job easier than somebody who's not as attractive. That's from the world. And there's cons to everything. There's also quid pro quo sexual harassment. There are many people, we saw this in the Me Too movement with Hollywood, women who just happen to be physically attractive who are being preyed upon by men to like take their clothes off and things just to be an actress, just to have a role. That's ridiculous. Some people are upset and they're like, oh, well, good looking people get more attention than other people. What do you want the attention for? Like, no, like really, what do you want it for? I suppose for your ego. Well, is it fair for them to get their ego boosted? Well, you're just assuming that their ego is boosted. So when I was in high school, I had to go to college for a course, and I told one of the professors that I was being sexually harassed in the hallways, and this is absolutely crazy. She became my friend later, but she said to me that she thought that I was bragging about being sexually harassed in the hallways. I was like, what? She was like, oh, so you're getting so much attention. Craziness. She wasn't a Christian, just crazy. There's also the problems of phony friends, not knowing why somebody is your friend. Are they your friend because they like you? Or are they your friend because, you can give them position or you can get into places with your appearance? Are they just using you? So a lot of good-looking people have to think about this. Trophy wives. Trophy wives are not necessarily loved. They're a lot of times considered to be like arm candy. They are completely objectified. Is that a life that you want? Some people would say yes, if they want just money and stuff. But our human desire is to be loved. So I don't know if that's really that great. This also applies to men. And a lot of men get thrown under, they just get washed under. You don't even think about them. But really good looking men have a tendency to be quite lonely as well, especially if they're decent men, because they can't make real friends with either guys or girls. Girls are, trying to be with them or like insecure around them. And then men, if they make guy friends, they're like worried about their women meeting them, or they look at this guy and they're like, oh, I can't even go out with you if they're single, because they're like, oh, you're like a super Chad. All the women are going to flock to you and nobody else. And so it becomes this epic competition all the time. And then sometimes both sides, both men and women, will sit there and disparage another person's character just because they're attractive without actually asking them anything about themselves, just making assumptions because other people look at them that they must be sleeping around. That's gossip. It's terrible. Many good-looking people, they don't have friends, they don't have many, and they can't even get into romantic relationships. People don't think about this, but if you're just like average or just maybe slightly above average, life is usually better in this world. If you're looking for the things of this world, it is. So would life really just be better because you're physically beautiful? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Now, we have an appreciation for beauty, and the truth is it does cause different reactions in the human body when you come up to a person who's attractive, but it really just we just got to let it go, especially as believers. We need to look past the exterior and into the soul. Be like, oh, well, that's something God can do. We can all do it. We can all look at a person as a soul. I like to look at people this way because that's more after God's heart. God is looking at our souls. We are eternal human beings. This shell will die away, but our soul goes on. So look past the appearance into the soul. So what about internal beauty? Because that just leads us right into that. And I said I'm just going to kind of touch on it. Internal beauty is what we should all be cultivating, especially as believers. God's character should be growing in us the closer we get to Christ and seeking his righteousness. And then that will just kind of like, come out on us, and you just become a more beautiful person in general. And people will just like being around you. I love what Jesus says. Jesus says it's what comes out of the body that defiles us. So goodness comes out of us if you're a believer. But it says in Mark 7, I'm not going to read the whole verse, but for from within the hearts of men come evil thoughts and, theft, murder, and other things. That comes out of the heart. Have you ever met somebody, I'm sure you have, that you thought was physically attractive, whose words or behaviors, you just question them. And then you're like, I don't think so anymore. This actually happened to me. I saw a guy that I thought was really attractive, and he went to go pay me. And I mean, I only gave him 2 strikes. All he needed was the 2 because they were terrible. He pulled out a wad of cash, and it was like crumpled and just gross looking. And I was like, this guy's like 26 years old. Why is his money not in a wallet? I said, why is he paying me this way? So that was strike 1. And then strike 2 was when he said, don't judge me. I just came from a strip club. And I was like, and we're done. Not attractive at all. And so that's how easy an internal character or a lack of can change what you're like on the outside. So let's it's nice to have a nice outside, do the best with what you have, but it's not all about that. And to prove that, let's look at the best life ever. I always love looking at Jesus's life. Jesus never talks about physical beauty in the New Testament. As I said, it's not really in there. He doesn't talk about it at all. And so it describes Jesus in Isaiah 53, 2-3. Listen to what Jesus is described as. He had no stately form or majesty to attract us, no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, like one from whom men hide their faces. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Wild. Jesus, perfect example of humility, came to this earth in a regular dude's body. Why? So that people weren't drawn to him for his good looks, that they would come to him for his message. But look at what it said. We expect our kings to be like, glorious, and he arrives in a manger. No glory to it. But God is so majestic to behold in all of his beauty and glory. Jesus didn't have any of that external beauty as a king on this earth, and people still reject him. So I'm going to close part 1 here, okay? This may not have been the video that you expected, but I am trying to bring to light things that other people, I haven't heard them say in a different perspective. And I want everybody to understand that we are all created for a reason, not for this earth, for eternity. Okay? So part 2 right now will be about, that's next week, will be about the temple, our body being a temple, what we wear then, fashion, modesty, and this applies to both men and women. I do not discriminate. We both need to be upkeep, okay? The things that we eat and drink. And then I am going to do a really super duper quick, and I mean it super quick, touch and go on transgenderism, because our bodies are connected to who we are. I need to explain that. And so if you watch this before I film next week's, then I can tack some things on. Otherwise, I hope you learned something. Subscribe and join me next week. Thanks, guys.